My name is Cora. I'm 27 years old. I learned that betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it waits quietly behind a new lock you didn't know existed. The morning everything changed began like any other. Coffee gulped too fast, keys tossed into my bag, a rushed goodbye to a house that never truly felt like mine despite the $1,200 I wired every month. I was halfway through my shift when my phone buzzed. A harmless vibration that carried the weight of an earthquake. I almost ignored it, almost. Instead, I glanced down and saw my mother's name glowing on the screen, followed by a message that hollowed my chest in a single breath. "Your room is your sister's now. Come get your stuff from the lawn." I remember rereading it, convinced exhaustion had blurred the words into something crueler than reality. But the letters didn't change. They sat there, cold and final, as if typed by strangers. My coworkers kept talking. Printers hummed, phones rang, yet the world had tilted, leaving me gripping the edge of my desk as memories collided with disbelief. I had moved back home after my father insisted it would help me save money, a phrase that now felt like a joke whispered at my expense. Save money while paying him $200 a month in rent. Save money while funding repairs, groceries, utilities, contributions that made me feel less like a daughter and more like an invisible tenant with no lease, no protection, no voice. My sister hadn't even mentioned wanting my room. No warning, no conversation, just a digital eviction delivered between meetings. I didn't call. I didn't beg. Pride and shock welded my jaw shut. But beneath them something steadier was forming, something far less fragile than hurt. I finished my shift in a fog, each minute stretching painfully, my mind replaying every family dinner, every forced smile, every subtle reminder that I was still living under their roof, as if my payments were imaginary. When I finally drove home, the truth greeted me with humiliating clarity. My belongings, my clothes, books, framed photographs, the quilt my grandmother made, were scattered across the front lawn like unwanted debris. Neighbors pretended not to stare. A few did anyway, and there, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was the final insult, the front door, sealed behind unfamiliar locks. My keys, once symbols of belonging, were suddenly meaningless scraps of metal. I stood frozen, a strange calm settling over me, the kind that follows when anger burns too hot to flare outward. My parents didn't open the door. No apologies, no explanations drifting through the windows. Just silence, thick and deliberate. The message had said everything they intended to say. In that moment, humiliation could have crushed me. It nearly did. But humiliation has a curious twin, clarity can be dangerously empowering. I gathered what I could without drama. Each item placed into my car, not as a defeated daughter, but as someone quietly closing a chapter. Every memory of financial support I'd provided replayed with new meaning. Every bank transfer, every sacrifice, every postponed dream sharpened into evidence. The drive away from that house felt surreal, like exiting a life that had been rewritten without my consent. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from sadness, but from the realization that something fundamental had snapped. They had expected tears, pleas, maybe rage. They had expected me to accept their decision as unquestionable authority. They did not expect what came next. I drove straight to the courthouse. Not home to a friend, not to a motel, not to cry in a parking lot, but to a building of quiet, hallways and fluorescent lights where emotions mattered less than documentation. It wasn't revenge that guided me through those doors. It was the simple refusal to be treated as disposable after years of contribution. The clerk's voice was routine and different, yet to me it sounded like the beginning of something irreversible. I laid out my records, my payments, my proof, each sheet of paper a counterweight to the message that had tried to erase my place. With every signature, a strange steadiness replaced the earlier shock. I realized that day that dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes dignity is a pen moving across a form, a decision made without spectacle, a boundary drawn in ink instead of tears. By the time I stepped back into the fading evening light, exhaustion had mixed with a quiet, unshakable resolve. My parents believed changing locks would end the story. They believed a text message could redefine reality. They had no idea that a different kind of knock was already on its way, carried not by anger, but by process, by law. by consequences they never saw coming. After leaving the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious or relieved. I felt anchored, as though something irreversible had been set into motion. The city lights blurred past my windshield while my mind replayed the message again and again. Your room is your sister's now. Come get your stuff from the lawn. Those words had pushed me out of a home, but they had also pushed me into clarity. My parents believed they held absolute power because it was their house, their rules, their decision. What they never considered was that my money, my contributions, my $1,200 every single month, created a reality they could not simply lock away. I spent the next few days moving through life like someone carrying a secret storm. I stayed with a friend, answered questions with half smiles, and waited. Waiting was the hardest part. There is something uniquely agonizing about knowing consequences are coming while the rest of the world continues as if nothing has changed. My phone remained mostly silent. No apology, no explanation, no trace of guilt. Just a stubborn, almost arrogant quiet, as though they expected me to crawl back, humbled and compliant. But humiliation had already transformed into something far more dangerous to their expectations: resolve. Every morning I woke with the same thought. They chose this. Not me. They chose the locks. They chose the lawn. They chose to reduce their daughter to a pile of belongings under the open sky. By Thursday night, the tension inside me had tightened into a wire. I barely slept. Not from fear, but from anticipation. I kept imagining the moment the abstract would become real, when paperwork would stop being ink and start being impact. Friday arrived with a strange stillness, the air itself feeling charged. I was sitting in my friend's kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee gone cold when my phone finally rang. My sister's name flashed across the screen. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, letting the call drift unanswered the way my dignity had been days earlier. But curiosity won. Her voice was unsteady, stripped of its usual sharpness. Cora, what did you do? The question landed not as accusation, but as confusion edged with panic. Before I could answer, she continued, words tumbling over each other. There's a sheriff here. Mom's crying. Dad looks like he can't breathe. I said nothing, my heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. The moment had arrived. Not with drama, not with confrontation, but exactly as the system had promised. Calm, procedural, devastatingly official. In my mind, I could see it. The knock at the door, firm and indifferent. My father's confident stride dissolving into unease. My mother's certainty cracking under the weight of authority she could neither dismiss nor argue with. The sheriff wasn't there to shout or threaten. He didn't need to. The papers spoke with a language far more terrifying to people who believed themselves untouchable. Legal language, unemotional, absolute. My sister's breathing grew ragged through the phone. They're saying things about illegal eviction, tenant rights, financial records. Each phrase must have sounded surreal inside that living room, ricocheting off walls that had witnessed my childhood, my sacrifices, my quiet compliance. My parents had rewritten the rules of our relationship with a lock. Now those rules were being rewritten again, this time by statutes and regulations they had never bothered to understand. I imagined my father's face draining of color, the same man who had once lectured me about responsibility, now confronted with a version of responsibility he could not intimidate or ignore. I pictured my mother's hands trembling, not with anger, but with the dawning realization that decisions made in arrogance often return, dressed as consequences. Dad says you've embarrassed the family, my sister whispered, as if the accusation still carried power. I almost laughed, but the sound that escaped me was softer, tired, edged with something colder than bitterness, embarrassment. Such a fragile word for what they had done. Such a convenient shield against accountability. The truth was brutally simple. They had expected obedience, not resistance. Silence, not documentation. Tears, not a courthouse. The sheriff's presence shattered the illusion that family authority existed outside the boundaries of law. For the first time, they were forced to see me not as a dependent child, but as someone whose contributions had legal weight, whose displacement had consequences, whose dignity could not be casually discarded. When the call ended, I sat motionless, absorbing the strange mixture of emotions swirling inside me. There was no joy in their distress, no triumphant thrill. Only a deep, steady sense of balance restored. Actions meet consequences. Cause meet effect. The universe has a way of correcting certain imbalances with ruthless precision. My parents changed the locks while I was at work. They believed that was the end of the story. They believed a text message could erase years of payments, sacrifices, and basic respect. But by Friday, a sheriff was at their door with papers that made them sick. Papers that forced reality back into the room they had tried to deny me. And if there's one thing this experience carved into my bones, it's this: never confuse silence with weakness, and never mistake patience for surrender. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one delivered without shouting, carried by nothing more dramatic than a knock, a badge, and the undeniable weight of the truth.